Zucker recently explained the company's positions on two items, covering the 2012 Benghazi terrorist attack and climate change. In explaining how CNN has not reported extensively on the September 11, 2012 Benghazi terrorist attacks and the subsequent lies and deception by the Obama administration regarding what happened there that day, Zucker stated, quote, "We're not going to be shamed into it by others who have political beliefs that want to try and have temper tantrums to shame other news organizations into covering something. If it's of real news value, we'll cover it," end quote. If a terrorist attack that kills 4 Americans, followed by a coordinated cover-up by the White House, no longer constitutes news, then CNN should remove the middle N from its name. And let's not forget that Candy Crowley's embarrassing showing at the 2012 presidential debate, where she erroneously bailed out President Obama concerning Benghazi and pretended that she, not the American people, had the authority to render judgment on the candidates. Regarding climate change, Zucker noted that, quote, "There tends to be a tremendous amount of lack of interest on the audience part for these stories." But he went on to state that climate change nonetheless deserves more attention, but the network simply hasn't figured out how to engage the audience with these stories. In other words, CNN is going to try and force its viewers to eat peas on climate change while continuing to ignore the unraveling Benghazi scandal. Last year, you told me that bias is simply a matter of perception. However, we have CNN's president now publicly displaying hostility towards Americans, particularly conservatives who are following the Benghazi scandal closely, and explaining his willingness to ignore 4 dead Americans while protecting liberal politicians. At the same time, he is trying to force the global warming regulatory agenda on the public, despite the fact the Earth hasn't warmed since the Clinton administration, and climatologists who tell us to believe in the global warming theory simply don't know why that's happened. That's not perception, sir, that's reality. Also in May, it was revealed that the Chicagoland producers coordinated directly with Chicago Mayor Rahm Emanuel to ensure that that miniseries was essentially a campaign commercial for Emanuel. That's also not perception, that's reality. A Google search for CNN liberal media bias yields over 940,000 results. Not perception, reality. Last week, CNN promoted David Chalian to its political director, despite the fact that this is the man that during the 2012 Republican National Convention disgustingly stated that, quote, "The GOP was happy to have a party while black people were drowning as Hurricane Isaac was coming up the coast." So my question is this. Polls consistently show that many more Americans identify as conservative than do liberal, yet CNN, led by Zucker and now also Chalian, continues to plot a leftward course in reporting the news. Fox News, which is perceived as conservative, continues to dominate the ratings, while CNN even fell below MSNBC in May. I'm not asking you to replace your former anti-Second Amendment crusader Piers Morgan with Ann Coulter, but is there any chance you can at least do 2 things? First, admit that bias exists and it's a problem, because without admitting the problem, you can't fix it. And second, start making changes to the network to make it less hostile to a large segment of conservative Americans. This way we can grow the channel's viewership and all the shareholders can reap the rewards.
Thank you. So your question is, thank you. Is your question whether I would admit bias at CNN? Is that what's the question?
Well, the question is twofold. First, do you recognize that there is a liberal bias at the network and that may be hurting the ratings, and start doing something about it to increase the viewership? If 40% of Americans identify as conservative, 40% as independent, and 20% as liberal, why cater to the 20% and ignore the 80%? It seems you're automatically stubbing your toe and limiting your viewership.
Okay, thank you. So I think, as we all know, many of us here are Americans, not all, but even if you aren't, in whatever country, if it is a democracy that you live in, you know that there's a lot of disagreement of what is your set of political values and so on. And the issue of journalism is, and you're actually alluding to it, is kind of a long one and it's complicated. It's a question of whether your journalistic enterprise identifies itself as having an allegiance to a certain point of view, which the one that you cited, you cited Fox, CNN, and MSNBC. Actually, I think that in the case of Fox, they don't self-identify a point of view, even though you just judged that they are...
They're perceived, not self-identified.
They're not self-identified. So what you have here is a question of perception and values on an issue. You know, I don't think we should reduce it just to right and left. There are plenty of issues that are not right and left. They're cultural, religious, et cetera, that people have different views on. That's why we have democracy. The aim of news organizations, at least our news organizations, Time Inc., when it was here, and CNN, which is with us very strongly, is that we are trying to, and you're judging it a failure, we are trying to be independent and objective in our news reporting. And we aren't doing, if I can answer this part of your question, we aren't making our news judgments and our news selection and treatment of stories based on serving a given part of the political spectrum or religious spectrum or anything else. We're trying to be an objective news journalism organization. You can, and I'm not going to, we're all people here, we're all voters too, we're all viewers and voters. None of us, I imagine, are satisfied either with the political candidate we may be supporting because they have this view we agree and that one we don't. And we're probably not satisfied with whatever news report we're getting, either in the paper or on TV. That's the name of the game. It's going to be something that people never agree on. In the voting and political structure, that's why we set up the democracy the way we did, so that we could handle and manage the disagreement. So I hear your views. I understand them. I'm not admitting what you ask, that we have any deliberate agreement or belief that we're following one or another political point of view. I do, however, take your question and your dissatisfaction as a very constructive thing. I think that is the way we should approach looking at how we're doing every day. I encourage you to keep doing it. Believe me, we have people on, you could describe it in the political, on the other side, that would say the same thing. It's a question of a viewer's judgment of how we're doing. We think we're doing better, and but I hear you. It's a fair game, what you're saying, and it should be an open question. So thank you.
Thank you.
Could we have microphone number one? Is it number one? Number one.